Hello and welcome to ClockTower Game Studios. So this is going to be the start of a series of videos based on planning and building terrain. This is going to be based on some stuff inspired by a trip abroad I had for college a couple years back. I stayed in Japan for a few months in a city called Nagoya. So this is the project I've dubbed Neo Nagoya. It's kind of a near future cyberpunk sci-fi sort of take on Nagoya. So I've got some stuff that I've already made, including a Buddhist park. I'll throw some shots of this stuff in along the way. But there's a Buddhist park, there's a vending machine plaza, which are somewhat common in larger cities in Japan. It's basically a mini mall, like strip mall type thing, but it's all vending machines. So I've already got those two things made, and I've also got started on a big capsule hotel project. But for a video, I wanted to start from the beginning of a project and work my way through like an entire construction project. So aside from that, I'm also going to be discussing how to plan individual buildings as well as the full game table, because this is more of a complex interlocking modular table. Since we live in an apartment, we don't really have space to store like big chunky, like 6-inch tall, full-on static terrain boards. There's not really a good place for us to keep that. But it's a lot easier, as you can see, to store smaller pieces off to the side on bookshelves or whatever, and then keep the actual game tiles, the 2-foot by 4-foot boards that I'll be discussing in more detail. It's easier for me to store those stacked up against a wall somewhere or something than it is to have it all put together on one static table. So other than that, this build's going to discuss materials, tools, the planning procedure, and in this video in particular, we're going to focus primarily on the planning part of it because, like I said, this is a big interlocking board. There's going to be a lot of planning that goes into it. So that's where we're going to start, and then probably the next video will be actually getting into construction. So the plan is right now to do a video on Thursdays every week dedicated to the cyberpunk terrain. And then on Mondays, I'll be posting other more typical hobby stuff involved around mini painting. So a little something for everybody. Currently out of work at the moment for my real job, so the world's a funky place right now. So just doing whatever we can to contribute and get by. Hopefully this entertains and is informative for some people. Yeah, the world keeps spinning, right? Anyhow, hopefully you enjoy the video and we'll get stuck in. Before even starting to plan out your actual build, the first thing you have to do is get some inspiration. Go out online, dig through your personal experiences. You can find all kinds of images and stuff, not just for mine, as you can see from the images, I was going with definitely the Japanese Asian theme. You don't have to do that, and you don't have to use just real pictures either. A lot of games are based in more fantasy stuff. This board is more like modern sci-fi, but of course you can aim for more fantasy elements. You can draw a lot of inspiration from things you find online, from the game companies that make your models, TV shows, movies, anything like that. Anywhere where you can get an idea for different buildings and different landscapes, any of that can be used. Of course, like I said, mine primarily is focused on an urban environment. Pinterest is another great place to look for this sort of thing. I like to collect all my images on a specific board. This is my Japanese board you saw there. So once you've got your inspiration, it's pretty easy to start planning. I started with 2-foot by 4-foot plywood sections that I'm going to be building off of. And like I said in the intro, this is to make the board modular and easier to arrange how I want it for gameplay and for storage. So there are other options. You can also, build a big static board that's in place. That's usually more common for game stores, though, in places where the board doesn't need to move much. The advantages of that is that lets you get a lot more detailed and blend your individual terrain elements, like buildings and wooded sections and the like, into the board itself. And that has its cons, and it can look a lot better. The disadvantage is it takes up a lot of space. It's hard to move. If you live in an apartment, it's really a drag. That said, like I said, you can do some really cool things with a static display board. So I'm going with a 2-foot by 4-foot base, and I'm building mine in sections. So what I decided is I wanted to do city streets that could be swapped around, moved, interchanged. And so the first thing to do was kind of mark out and plan how I wanted to do that. So I decided straight off I wanted the streets to be at least 6 inches across for the actual paved section. That would give me the best kind of scale and scope to use for any kind of vehicles I wanted to build. They could be up to 3 inches, 2.5, 3 inches wide, look good in scale for the 28 to 32 millimeter range, and then give me a curb that I could build against if I put a sidewalk around it, so that the buildings would kind of slot into space and sort of have almost like a foundation plot to put stuff down into that would almost lock it in place on its own. So there I'm just marking that off now that I've got my dimensions figured out. I've got an 8-inch by 8-inch terrain tile that are going to be the cornerstone and sort of the building block of my modular terrain pieces. So there I've got 1 inch for sidewalks, and then the 8 by 8, and I'm just going to go through and mark off my table and kind of get an idea for this. As you can see my graph there, I put together the design for an intersection so I could get a good basis for, you know, how to set that up if I wanted to. This also gave me a chance to mark out my paper and get an exact idea of how many of these 8 by 8 sections I had to fill with terrain. So as I got to planning it, I got that figured out, decided how I wanted to do my streets. So the next thing to do was to figure out an exact configuration for how I wanted to arrange the individual tiles and how many of them I wanted to make. I have 3 of these 2-foot by 4-foot boards, so I've already made 2 of them, and I'm just kind of planning out other intersections and road configurations that I can put on them. So the first thing I did was made up some mock-ups on some graph paper, and once I had those drawn up, I just cut them out and then started fiddling with them to figure out different arrangements and configurations. These are all steps that it's possible to skip if you do a different kind of terrain. So the reason mine requires this kind of planning and sort of forethought is that the streets interlock, and I want to make sure that they all line up and everything's solid connected with them as far as that goes, and they all tie in together. If you were doing forest or swamp or jungle or desert or even city ruins, this is a lot less of a concern, and you can just make modular terrain on individual bases that it doesn't really matter as much how they connect. Because of the city streets and wanted to keep it all nice and orderly and be like a recently evacuated war zone, that makes this a lot more involved as far as making sure that all the streets line up, all of the buildings fit into the same sort of size slots, and that they're all interchangeable. Like I said, if you did this with basically any other kind of terrain, it's not really as important. I just wanted to make things complicated on myself, I suppose. As I said before, I've already got a couple of these boards started. One of them's finished. This one, as you can see, is a pair of crossroads, and it's still a work in progress. I have the road bed down and the sidewalk stuck in, but it's not painted and textured. This one, on the other hand, is a finished board. I've got the surface of the streets finished. I've got the sidewalks detailed. The street detailing's already put on there. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. This was kind of my test piece, and I'm looking forward to finishing the other one, and I think maybe down the road I will do a tutorial about how I did those. Now I'm going to move on to the actual building I'm working on next, which is a koban, or a Japanese police station, and these are some of the images I used for the inspiration for that. Now I really liked how this was sort of a modern piece of architecture but was still very Japanese in flavor. It has some curved rounded surfaces, it has some holes in the roof detailing, the railing sort of, and I liked how it had sort of the awning for the car to be parked under. So part of the inspiration for this building was Titan Forge's Patreon campaign for March. They did a cyberpunk themed one that included a bunch of office furniture, as you can see here, including cubicles, some filing cabinets, desk chairs, that sort of thing, and also included this fantastic hover car. Now these were all 3D printed on my Elegoo Mars, but you don't have to have a 3D printer to do this sort of stuff. I could have used any kind of appropriately scaled model car, or even toy cars, or even toy furniture, build it myself, whatever the case may be. The point is, you don't have to have a 3D printer or any kind of fancy tools to do this with. You can do it all by hand. And I've made a vehicle for this board already out of just plastic card. So here's some of the finished stuff that I've already got done. Here's the vending machine plaza that I had mentioned. I went out of my way to make it look recently abandoned, so everything's still fairly colorful. Sure, it's been used, there's some rust and everything, but it still looks pretty good. And then this is a street view of some models, including a scratch-built tank. Again, nothing on there was 3D printed. That was all put together by hand. So you can do this sort of stuff without a printer, without any fancy tools. So in the next video, I'm going to go over more of how to plan out the specific building and get started on it, including selecting materials and the tools you'll need. I hope this overview is a little helpful for the planning stage of whatever terrain you're thinking about making. And just remember to pull inspiration from wherever you can find it, whether it's history or fantasy, sci-fi, movies, whatever strikes your fancy. The point is to just, if you want to have things that interconnect and really take a lot of effort, you have to plan ahead. So just get an idea how you want to lay things out, and then make adjustments as needed and brainstorm about it. Just get it all kind of laid out and kind of make your own roadmap. So with that, thank you to Titan Forge for letting us use their models and their fantastic sculpts. Really happy to be able to take advantage of those. And hopefully this video was informative. If you have any questions or anything to do with the process that I use to brainstorm and kind of plan ahead for my builds, please drop those in the comments section below. I'll be sure to check those out. Also, if you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also support us on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or shopping in the Amazon affiliate links, which we don't have on this video because we didn't use any tools, but they'll be in other videos, especially later in the series. So with that, always remember, at the Clock Tower, it's always game time.